Good morning, econ students. Today we're going to be looking at Unit 3 Economics, Business Cycle, Inflation, Growth, and Vocabulary. So the first thing we're going to do is a little review on drawing the business cycle. So go ahead and follow with me. Let's start with our nice steady growth of 3%. We want that nice long run growth of GDP of 3%. So it's real GDP. Remember, we're going to have those ups and downs along the way of our nice smooth business cycle. Now, up here at the peak, we are going to have inflation, and pi stands for inflation. If you want to use that symbol, you can, that's fine. So we've got our peak, we've got GDP long run, and we got our 3% growth, and of course we have inflation up here. Remember, that's our positive output gap right here. And if things don't fix themselves, we need to slow down the economy with some contractionary policy. And that's where we're going to have a better marker. So if it can't fix itself, we'll need the government to step in by either raising taxes or lowering government spending to make this peak go into contraction. Now, as we make the economy slow down a little bit, that's going to reduce all this inflation, and eventually we'll end up in the trough. And at this trough, of course, is where we can have unemployment, and remember, U% stands for unemployment. And when we get down to this trough, if things get too bad, we could fall into a recession. And we don't want that. And if we do end up running into a recession, and things get too bad, we'll need to make the economy go. So we need expansionary policy to fix that if it spikes down too much, kind of like the pandemic. Okay? Now, as we start to recover, of course, this is known as expansion. And we'll have these ups and downs as we head into October and we have Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and all that. The economy is going to start to do better. So in these short runs, these are our waves up and down, right? So the business cycle will have its ups and downs, and now we're going to focus on this inflation part right here. So when we have inflation, what that is, it's a sustained increase in the general price level of goods and services within an economy. So that's going to be inflation. Now, the opposite of inflation is called deflation. And this really doesn't ever happen, because once prices start to go up, they don't ever really come back down. And, that's an unfortunate part of the economy, but it's just true. Prices are always going to go up, and then wages are going to chase them, of course. There's only 2 times when prices have actually come down and we've had deflation. That was the Great Depression and the Great Recession of 2008. And it's not gonna happen, but we hope it does. If we take out food and fuel, those 2 very volatile things, we can see that prices just kind of keep ticking up. What we want, though, is called disinflation. And that is where the rate of inflation is slowing down, but prices are still rising. That's what we want. We don't want prices to rise very drastically. We want them to slow down how fast they are rising. So we are experiencing disinflation, which is the inflation rate decreasing. We're not going to have deflation. So when someone comes out and says, oh, prices are going down, that's not really true. Okay? And so the way we measure this is by looking at the Consumer Price Index. And that Consumer Price Index, or CPI, is the measure of the average change over time in the prices paid by urban consumers for a market basket of consumer goods and services. Now, this market basket we have been measuring since 1983, and that's our base year of 100 for CPI. So we've been looking at about 80,000 goods and services since 1983, and that's how we track everything is going on in the economy, price-wise. Now, the price index that measures the price and change of goods and services that are consumed by households and nonprofits is called PCE, and that's called the Personal Consumption Expenditures. Now, the personal consumption expenditures gives us a better idea of what's being consumed by houses, and that really is what the Federal Reserve likes to use as their inflation indicator. Not just CPI, because it's so broad and it changes over time. We want to see what people are actually buying and if those prices are going up. So we know that with beef and eggs and things like that. Now, when it comes to inflation, there are two different types. The first type is called cost push. And it's exactly what it sounds like. Cost push inflation means as costs for manufacturers are rising production costs like wages, raw materials, that leads to higher prices. So the cost of producing is what pushes up prices. That's known as cost push inflation. We had a lot of that during COVID, where we had our supply chain issues because the supply side is production. And that production, of course, when the things are using parts from other countries, if we put tariffs on them, which are taxes on imports, they are also a cause of cost push inflation, which we could see in the next few months. Now, the opposite side that also happened during COVID was called demand pull inflation. So demand pull is when we are demanding up stuff at such a rapid rate, more than what we're used to. It's when high consumer demand outpaces supply, causing prices to rise, also called a shortage. So we had a bad combination of these during COVID. Is we had supply chain issues for input prices, like intermediate goods, and at the same time we had a crazy amount of demand that our economy wasn't used to. So you push both these together, and we're going to get a huge amount of inflation, which we got right after the economy slowed down. So we had a weird time called stagflation, of simultaneous inflation and recession or unemployment. Now, like in the business cycle, remember, like Adam Smith said, these ups and downs are going to fix themselves. But if they don't, we need expansionary policy, green to make it go, or contractionary policy, red to make it slow. And that would be, of course, raising taxes or lowering government spending, lowering taxes or increasing government spending. So this increase in government spending actually was part of this demand pull. Now, if they don't fix themselves and we need that policy, there's going to be two sides to this now. Fiscal and monetary. This is your first introduction to monetary policy. So contractionary fiscal policies are put in place by Congress and POTUS. If you don't know, POTUS stands for President of the United States. Now, they do have some power, like issuing tariffs or reducing tariffs and having some influence over taxes, but Congress does have the final say in everything. So the first, of course, is to increase taxes. And that leads to consumption decreasing. Because if we make your paycheck smaller, then you can't buy as much. Unfortunately, this leads to unemployment. The second one is to decrease government spending. So the decrease in government spending is going to cause unemployment as well, as you can see in the government shutdown right now. So that was the initial idea of Doge, was to decrease government spending. And that decrease, or the cutting of the government, of course, could offset any cuts in taxes that were made by the administration. All right. Now, if Congress can't get along, which they're not even meeting right now at all, then we'd leave it up to monetary policies. And that's going to be the Federal Reserve Bank. So, contractionary monetary policies or expansionary are put in place done by the Federal Reserve Bank. So their main tool to fight inflation, of course, is to raise interest rates. Of course, when they raise interest rates, that leads to investment decreasing. And that's capital I of Sig X and a decrease in interest-sensitive consumption. Of course, that I is part of Sig X, and that leads to aggregate demand decreasing, and that leads to GDP decreasing. So that contractionary policy is in place right now, and it's been fighting inflation for the last couple of years. So our Federal Reserve would like an inflation rate of about 2%. That's the goal. And that 2%, of course, is really a nice target. And so this is the rate at which prices rise, not at which prices are inflating or CPI is changing, but that's what we want as far as prices are going. Now, who is happy with high interest rates? That's an interesting question. Well, of course, it's going to be the wealthy or savers. That is because money in your bank account gets paid by this high interest. It does make borrowing not attractive to borrowers, like as in mortgages and houses. So the high interest rate keeps people from investing. But if your house is paid off and you don't care and you're not buying one, all that money you have in the bank is actually going to increase in value. So this increases interest income. So that would make me happy if we have contractionary policies. There's a lot of people who are excited about that over the last couple of years because their savings accounts have been looking really good, but it has slowed the market on everything. So this is the front page of our notes for today.